Hello and welcome. Today I'll be talking about the three absolute basics of photography. The three musketeers called aperture, ISO and shutter speed. I will try to explain these concepts in a way that really makes sense. So even though you have never touched a camera before, you will still come out at the end of this video with a lot of clarity. Also, if you like the content that I'm making here, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really gives me a lot of boost and encouragement while creating content. Now, photography is all about capturing light in a way that makes sense. And to do that, we use lenses. Every lens has a set of blades. These blades can be opened or closed, thereby creating a smaller or bigger hole in the process. This hole is the opening through which light enters the lens. This is the opening which is called the aperture. And the size of this aperture is measured in ratio of the focal length of that lens, also called f-stops. Now f-stops can increase or decrease in number. So if you go to a higher f-stop, let's say f11 or f16 or f22, this simply means that you are dividing the focal length by a bigger number. The opening or the aperture in the lens obviously will become smaller. You will have less light coming in because your opening is literally smaller. Conversely, if you divide the focal length by a smaller number as you go to the lower f-stops, your opening will become bigger because now you are dividing the focal length by a smaller number. Wider the opening, more light comes in. Now when we are changing the aperture or f-stop, it's not only the light which gets impacted, there's also something which changes, and it is called the depth of field. Every lens has an area called focal plane. All the objects located inside that area or focal plane are always sharp and in focus. All the other objects that reside outside that focal plane will either be blurred out or simply not in focus or not so sharp. The depth of this focal plane is called depth of field, and it depends directly on your aperture or f-stops. So if you go to a higher f-stop, the depth of this focal plane will become bigger. If you go to a lower f-stop, the depth of this focal plane will become smaller. On the higher end, this depth of the focal plane can even reach infinity. So let's say you want a shallow depth of field, which simply means that you really want to focus on one or two subjects and you want everything else to be blurred out, like bokeh. In this case, you should aim for a higher aperture. However, let's say you want a higher depth of field or a longer depth of field, which means you want almost everything in focus up till infinity. This usually happens when you're shooting landscape photography because then you want all the mountains and the trees and everything in focus. In this case, you should go for a higher aperture. That is why everybody talks about increasing your aperture or f-stops in order to get sharper photos. Now we can control the size of the aperture or the opening through which light enters. But how do we know that we have enough light? At some point we will have to stop taking in the light. Aperture in a lens has a door or shutter to do that. And we can decide when that door closes. This is called shutter speed. So when we talk about a faster shutter speed, we are literally saying that we will close the door over the aperture very quickly. Conversely, when we talk about a slower shutter speed, we are simply saying that we will take more time before closing the door over the aperture because we want more light. Every low light condition would require us to open that door over the aperture a bit more longer, right? Because we want as much light as we want. If we are shooting in bright sunny day, it's just too much light. So we can literally close that door over the aperture very quickly because it doesn't matter, we will still get a lot of light. That's how shutter speeds work. If we talk about shutter speed, it directly impacts motion blur. You should always go for a higher shutter speed if you want to freeze a motion, like let's say a flying bird or a car driving on a road. Conversely, if you want to capture motion blur, where you are interested in shooting light trails or maybe the smooth movement of water in a stream, you should go for a slower shutter speed. Now the lens has done its job. It has given us an opening through which light enters, aperture. And we can also decide for how long that light can enter, shutter speed. So we should have enough to take a photo. But there is one piece missing in this jigsaw puzzle, which is ISO. ISO basically is the sensitivity of your camera sensor, and you can increase or decrease the ISO in your camera. So when you are increasing or decreasing the ISO, you are simply telling your camera software to introduce some artificial light. As you increase the ISO, it creates a disturbance in your photo called noise. Now that we know about aperture, ISO and shutter speed, let's talk about how to use them together in a way that makes sense. So let's say you take a photo and it's very bright. It's just too bright in certain areas. Now, in such a situation, I will firstly bring down my ISO. I will lower my ISO as much as I can because higher ISO basically introduces more noise. Now that I have brought down my ISO and if the image is still too bright, I will raise my shutter speed. And in the end, as a last resort, I will raise my aperture. Now conversely, let's say you take a photo and it's too dark. It's simply underexposed. In this case, I will start by slowing down my shutter speed so that I want to have more light coming in. Now if that doesn't work and the photo is still too dark, I will raise the f-stops or lower the aperture. That just means that I am trying to make the opening of the aperture as wide as possible because I still want more light. And even in the case that this still doesn't work and the image is still too dark, at the end I will have to raise my ISO. Now I know that this is too much information in a very short time. So I have created a small cheat sheet for you to remember all of this. It's going to come on the screen in 3 seconds and you can take a screenshot. 3, 2, 1. This sheet is also available for download. The link is in the description of this video. Alright, so this was it. This was a simple explanation of aperture, ISO and shutter speed. I hope this was helpful to you. Right, so I hope you had fun. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.